Good morning, everybody. First and foremost, welcome and thank you for attending our today's webinar. Today's topic will be the invoicing and e-reporting reform that will be implemented starting July 1st, 2024 in France. So the purpose of today's presentation will be to popularize notions, which means make things accessible to persons specialized in accounting or legal or taxation, and allow you to correctly prepare for the upcoming changes. So for those who don't know me, I am Mathieu Bournac. I've been a VAT consultant for TEVEA International for 2 years now. And I will be assisted today by Pascal André, who will make us the honor to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Some of you already know me. You used to introduce this webinar, and Mathieu will share this presentation with me today. So I'll let you introduce the content of the webinar, Mathieu.
Exactly. So today's content, we will approach the reform with the following steps. Pascal will begin with a general introduction of the notions of the reforms with definitions. Then we will focus in the second section on what operations will be subject to the e-invoicing and e-reporting requirements. We will then follow up on who is concerned as a supplier, as a purchaser. So it will be interesting for you at that moment to focus on what are your operations and the criteria of establishment and registration. We will distinguish both of them in order to let you know if you are concerned by the reform. We will follow up in the fourth section on how the reform will be implemented, which means that we will get into a technical part and approach things with the data that must be transmitted to the tax authorities and the formats that are expected in the reform. And to conclude, we will finish on when will the reform be applicable, because it will be progressively implemented from 2024 to 2026 to companies depending on their size. You have to note and keep in mind that there will be additional information to come, and that tax administration hasn't published yet all the details in the implementation of the reform. Also, the video of the presentation will be available, as well as the PowerPoint presentation in the next few days or current of next week. And finally, you'll see that there is a chat room available, and if we have some times at the end of the presentation, we will try to check your questions in order to have a little Q&A's moment.
Okay, thank you, Mathieu. So I will start with a general introduction. The point is not to go deeply into the technique. It's not the point of this webinar. We just want to introduce the notions and talk about just to generalize the comprehension of e-invoicing and e-reporting. So e-invoicing basically is a file containing data, and these data will be transmitted to both the customer and the tax authorities. We'll see how in the next slide. And e-reporting is only a transmission of data. It's not an invoice. And this e-reporting is only destinated to the tax authorities, to the collection of information, and to optimize the VAT declaration. We will see it later. What is the purpose of the reform of code? Of course, it has an anti-fraud aim, because automatic collection of the information will avoid the fraud. The tax authorities will have a real-time information of the activity, and just keep in mind that that gap in France is about 13 million euros. So there is a there is an important stake here. Tax authorities aim to recover about 40% of this amount, implementing the e-invoices and the e-reporting. Accuracy of data, of course, because the data will be sent automatically without any human intervention. The collection will be done machine to machine. It will be easier to retrieve all the information, and there are additional information also that will be provided to the tax authorities to improve the knowledge of the activity of the companies, and also to monitor the VAT. Audit enhancement is about internal audit for the companies, because they will have more time to check what is happening in their process, because there is an administrative burden that is today complicated. You have to issue invoices, you have to account it, you have to fill the VAT reform. In the future, it will be no longer necessary. The invoice will be sent and the report will be automatically made, and the VAT form will be automatically filled in. So it is interesting for the companies, and also audit for the tax authorities. They will have all the information before running any audit, and it will be easier to track and to focus on specific transaction and specific companies that might be suspect or in a fraudulent activity. Mathieu, you need to talk about the legal sources.
Yeah, we also have included the legal sources that are implementing the reform in France. This can be a little technical if you want to check, but we're thinking that if you want to have deeper research on a specific aspect of the reform, you will be able to click on the right link and access directly the correct legal sources for the e-invoicing and e-reporting requirements.
All right, that's it for the general introduction. Let's go deeper into this webinar and talk about what is included, what is excluded on the e-invoicing upcoming reform, and the same for the e-reporting. So e-invoicing, what is included? It is all the B2B domestic sales and services. This transaction then will be mandatory be e-invoiced. Also international operation with third country, we talk about exports, and also specific transactions such as second-hand goods or antiques or public auctions. It is very important to keep in mind that all invoices are impacted by the reform, not only the commercial invoice, but also the advance payment, also the credit notes. All the invoices on the wide definition will be included in this mandatory electronic invoice in the future.
About what is excluded from the invoicing reform, there are two categories of operation that you need to be aware about, and these are special categories of economical activities that are VAT exempted by special provisions in the French tax code, such as we mentioned on the slide, agriculture, medicine, education, insurance, etc. And on the other hand, you have the operations that are related to a defense or security contract, which means mainly with public bodies of governments within the meaning of public procurement, which if you don't know the words in French means les appels d'offres. So it's mainly state contracts.
Okay. That was for the e-invoices. For the e-reporting, e-reporting will be composed of two parts, the purchases and the sales. On the purchase side, companies will have to report the intra-community acquisition of goods. that is important to understand that they might have to input it manually because the issuer of this transaction may not be able to provide an electronic flow, an electronic invoice. So company who will receive this kind of invoice for intra-community acquisition of goods will have to input it into the right format to send it on the and to be compliant with the e-reporting requirements. The same for the purchase of goods deemed located in France. We are talking about here of installation, assembly, or gas supply. It's when the provider is out of France and the recipient is a French company that will self-assess the VAT on the transaction. Also, the purchase of services under the Article 44 and Article 196 of the VAT Directive, the purchase of services that is self-assessed in France will have to be included in the e-reporting, and all the transaction with Monaco, all the purchase of goods or services from taxable person located in Monaco. On the sales side, companies will have to report all the international delivery of goods. So now we are talking about export and EU deliveries. It was not the case for e-invoices, and the supply of services to taxable persons that are out of France. It is the mirroring of the last slides. Also in B2C transaction, all the supplies of goods and services, all the supply of distance sales that are taxable in other countries, and all the distance sales that are taxable in France, and also all the transaction with Monaco, all the sales B2B or B2C to taxable person or private individual in Monaco. All this transaction will have to be included in the e-reporting. A new additional information that is requested by the e-reporting is the payment data. You know, in France, there is a specific treatment for VAT on services. The VAT is due at the moment the invoice is paid. That is the standard rule. There are different options that allow a company to declare the VAT on the date of the invoice and not the date of the payment. So this information will have to be included in the e-reporting, and also the supplier service to public procurement. It's the mirror of what Mathieu told you before on e-invoicing.
Thank you, Pascal. As for the exclusions in the reporting side, we have to highlight that these exclusions only concern taxable persons that are established outside of France. So it will not concern the taxable person with a place of establishment located in France. There are two categories of operations again, and these are the supply of goods or services under which the supplier will have to charge VAT on the invoice, and on the other hand, you will have to you will not have to report the supplies of goods and services that are in principle taxable in France, but that are reported in the place of establishment of the supplier under the OSS one-stop shop and import one-stop shop schemes. So we will take a look at who is concerned by the reform with a successive analysis of the conditions for the taxable person to be subject to these requirements on the e-invoicing and the e-reporting part, and then we will have a little speech on the new parties that are involved in the reform, as there are new actors for dematerialization. Who are subject to the invoicing requirements? As Pascal mentioned earlier, the invoicing requirements will be applicable to all operations, whether it's a supply of goods or services, between two taxable persons that are established in France. That highlights two conditions that are related to the operators that are concerned by a transaction. They have to be established in France, so we have to distinguish the place of establishment and the place of registration. The place of establishment is where the company has its headquarters, so that is the place of establishment. And be a taxable person means performing taxable operations in France and holding a French VAT number. So if you have a sale between two established persons that are registered for VAT purposes in France, you will be subject to the mandatory e-invoicing. We've also put underneath the penalties that will be applicable in case of failure to comply with the invoicing requirements. And I'll just mention the one that concern the taxable persons, as it will concern you in this specific area. So it will be 15 euros per invoice if you fail to comply, 250 euros per transmission within the limits of 15,000 euros per taxable person per year.
Mathieu, just a question. So if I understand well, if I am an Italian company established in Italy, and I have a French supplier that provide me some goods in my warehouse in France, so I understand that e-invoicing is not applicable in this case.
That's exactly the case. The point is the criteria of establishments. So you have to refer to, as I said, the headquarters, and not just is he holding a French VAT registration, as you can be established in any member states of European Union or any countries in the world and hold a French VAT number.
Okay, thank you.
On the e-reporting side, there are two conditions, again, to know if you are concerned by the e-reporting requirements, but there is only one that is concerning the taxable person precisely. So the e-reporting requirements will be applicable to all taxable person, so all person holding a French VAT number, and that's are involved, and that's a criteria, a condition that is focused on the operations that are involved in B2B or B2C international transactions with departure from France or with the country of delivery, that being France.
Okay, so if I take my last example again, I am an Italian company. I have a warehouse in France, and for example, I sell goods to my client in Germany. So this is an EU delivery from France.
This is an intra-EU delivery that will be subject to the reporting requirements, right? Because this will be a taxable person, so an Italian company holding a French VAT number involved in what we call a B2B international transaction, which is the intra-community delivery. So this will fall under the scope of the reform.
Then we have to talk about the different actors of the dematerialization. Sorry. The first and important platform that will be available is the public invoicing platform, the PIP. This is the only platform that will be able to communicate with the tax authorities. And this is the mandatory point that the e-invoice and the e-reporting will reach. It means that companies will be able to communicate with the PIP, and the PIP will treat the information and send it to the tax authorities. But the upcoming reform has also leave some room to other operators. The first one is the dematerialization operator, the DO. This is an optional third party that will help companies to issue or receive the e-invoice. This DO has no specific requirements. Is just a subcontractor of the taxable person to help him to meet the e-invoice and e-reporting requirements. There is another main actor. It is the partner platform. The PP partner platform will be private companies that will be registered to the tax authorities. They have to meet some specific requirement, they will obtain an agreement from the administration to act as a partner platform. And this company will be able to receive, to help first the companies to issue their e-invoices and to send it to the PIP. So it is an intermediary company that will help the private company, the taxable person, to issue and treat all this dematerialized flow. They will offer different services, such as compliance check, such as communication with the PIP, because there will be a directory available to all the companies to know where the invoices should be sent. They also can assure the update of the status of the invoice. We will talk about it later. So this partner platform will offer a lot of services that we have listed in the annex. You'll find it at the end of our presentation. And it is the difference between the DO. The PP is an official company registered to the tax authorities. The DO is not. The DO is just private companies that help the taxable person to issue and receive their invoices. I talk about a directory. Well, this is a virtual place where companies will declare how they will receive the invoice and where the invoice should be sent. It is basically a routing program, and this program will be updated. It is managed by the PIP, so the official platform of the tax administration, but the partner will be able to communicate with the directory and to update information with the central directory. The PIP will know where the e-invoice should be sent to the customer, because there is no, in the future, the supplier will not be able to send directly this invoice to the client. It will be the platform that will send the invoice to the client. There are different ways to be registered in the central directory. A company can use its serial number, its SIRET, or another unique identifier. It will be then easy to know how the company wants to receive the invoice and where she wants to receive this invoice electronically.
In terms of platforms interoperability, as mentioned, as Pascal mentioned earlier, there will be the implementation of the central directory, in which there will be the public invoicing platform and the partner platforms communicating data relating to the transaction between all the operators and all the transactions that are within the invoicing scheme. And the private partners will have to register under their unique identifier. There will also be an interoperability for the formats, and all applications will be able to communicate with each other with the implementation of a network with interconnection capacities. Okay. So it's mainly about the relation between the public invoicing platform and the partner platform. This will not be a communication between the suppliers or buyer of the transaction under which they are operating. We'll follow up on how will the reform be implemented in France. And as I mentioned in my introduction, this will be a little more technical part, as we're all accounting or legal specialists. So when we're mixing things up with informatic notions, it can be a little bit hard to follow. But as I said, we were trying to popularize notions in order to make things accessible. So we'll check the e-invoicing with the transmission circuits. So the transmission circuit is how the e-invoice, as well as the data related to the invoice, will be communicated between the parties. So you can see that between the partner platform and public invoicing, it will be more a data communication, whereas the documents will be communicated between the parties and the suppliers. So what you also have to highlight in this section is that, and to say one more time what Pascal mentioned in its parts, is that the private partners are an option for the suppliers and are an option for all the parties involved, as well as the dematerialization partner. So there is a scheme under which either the supplier or the buyer can operate with the private partner. And there is also a scheme in which the supplier and the buyer will be able to directly communicate things with the public invoicing platform. The main consequence being that there will be no PDF invoicing that will be directly communicating between the client and the buyer, which is the most common way companies were transmitting invoicing until now. So this is a scheme of the transmission circuits of the information and the invoice transmission. So there were several schemes discussed by the tax administration, but the Y scheme, the scheme that we're presenting now, is the one that was most talked about by the tax administration and by the actors of the sector. So we chose to focus on this one, this will be most probably the one that will be implemented during the reform. So as you can see, there are two schemes, as I mentioned earlier. There are the A scheme between the supplier A and customer A. So as you can see, there are different actors that might be involved in the flow of data. So there is the materialization platform that can be assisting the supplier in sending the data to the private partner. The supplier can also proceed with the private partner, sending him the e-invoice or the data required by this platform partner. And then this platform partner will communicate the e-invoice to the other platform or directly to the customer if he operates without one, and will send the transmission of data to the PIP, Public Invoicing Portal, that will communicate it to the tax administration. So there is the other scheme, which implies that there are no third party or optional parties involved, which will be the transmission of the invoice directly on the public invoicing platform or directly on the portal. And the point of it being that there are no intermediaries, and if the supplier is working with an internalized solution in order to issue e-invoices, they will be allowed to directly treat their data with the public invoicing portal.
Thank you, Mathieu. I will follow with the format. So we don't want to go deeply in the technique, as we said before, but you have to understand that there is two main formats: the syntactic format, this is the invoice format. Some of you already know the XML or EDI. PDF is a syntactic format also. It is basically what information should be included in the invoices. This is the syntactic format, and there is the semantic format. The semantic format is the transmission of the invoice to the tax authorities. This is a structured message for a technical point of view, a chain characters that follow a specific format to be sent to the tax authorities. So syntactic and semantic format are the two formats you have to understand. As we said, syntactic is the shape of the invoice. So it can be a structured invoice like EDI in France. It is all informatical code, but it also can be an hybrid invoice. And that is very interesting because France and Germany has developed the Facture X format. It is an hybrid format that includes an image of the invoice and also a structured message So this hybrid invoice can meet two requirements: is the legibility of the invoice. The invoice must be readable. It is a condition. So when an image is included in the message, it will be easier for small companies, for example, to read the invoice easily. And there is the structure message that will meet the e-invoicing requirement for the tax authorities. So this hybrid solution is under the spotlights, and it is very interesting, and probably France will generalize this kind of format. For the semantic format, there is a European Union norm, the 16931. It is also a chain of character in a specific order, and there is two formats: one for the communication between the partner platform and the PIP, and one between the companies and the PIP if they decide not to use a partner platform. All the basic information of an invoice are included in this format. There are additional information that are not requested today, such as the date of delivery, the date of performance of the service, the option to pay VAT on the date of invoice, for example. This kind of information are not requested today on the invoice, and it will be included in the e-invoice on the upcoming reform to help the tax authorities to determine the VAT amount and to pre-fill the VAT returns. Sorry, I just add something, Mathieu. We listed all the information in the annex, of course, so you'll be able to check it after the webinar. It was not very interesting for us and for you to list all this mentioned here, so it will be available for you later. Sorry, Mathieu.
All right, thank you, Pascal. Now, on the reporting side, there will be the needs and the obligation to report all data related to the B2B international operations. Just a quick reminder to tell you that invoice issuance is always mandatory when we're talking about B2B international operations. The data to transmit relates to the slide before mentioned by Pascal, as all new mandatory details specified in the invoicing requirements will be updated in the reporting requirements, which means that they will consist in the same details that will be listed at the end of this webinar in the annexes. And on the other hand, we'll have to take a look at the transmission methods. And again, it relates to the scheme we were showing you earlier, as there is one method that is being considered, which consists in the direct transmission between the operators, so seller and buyer on the other side, to the public invoicing portal, directly in the mentioned formats, in the required formats. So as Pascal mentioned earlier, the EDI, XML or UBL, and a mixed format that is always talked about when we're talking about the invoicing and e-reporting reform, which is the Factor X format. So this is the first method, which will be a direct communication between the parties and the public invoicing portal. And on the other hand, you will have the transmission with the partner platforms, which means that the supplier will send data to its partner platform. Sorry about that one. And then the platform will send all the data to the public invoicing portal. What you have to understand in this part is that there is no distinction on the obligation of reporting, whether the operation is a purchase of goods or a sale of goods, purchase of services, or a sale of services. Following up on the data that must be reporting and that is related to B2C operations, so to operations with private customers, we had to distinguish the operation for which an electronic invoice must be issued and those for which there is no electronic invoice that must be issued. You don't have to issue an electronic invoice, especially when you're under the distance selling regime, and that's when you report your transaction under the one-stop shop or the import one-stop shop scheme. So that means that there are specific details that are added when there is no electronic invoice issued, and it mainly consists, if you take a quick look at the chart we provided you, in payment details and transaction details related to the date of transaction, the amounts, the date of payment, and the period of transmission. So it's to identify clearly which goods for which there were no electronic invoice issued. And when you have to issue an electronic invoice, the reporting is basically the same as the one for B2B international operations, and you can take a look at all the details that are required, but it's mainly an e-invoice that will be transferred to the PIP or to the partner platform. So that's the same procedure as I mentioned in the slide before.
On the how part, we need also to talk about the reporting of data related to the invoice lifecycle and the payment details. What is the invoice lifecycle? This is a new mandatory information that will be required with this reform. The status of the invoice will need to be updated following the different steps. First, from the supplier, there is the obligation to mention that the invoice is submitted. Then the customer will need to accept or reject the invoice. And once the invoice is paid, the supplier will have to inform the tax authorities that the invoice has been paid. So these are the four mandatory status. There are other status that are optional for the moment of the beginning, from the beginning of the reform. But it can be very, very in a thin analyze. There is different status. For example, it can be an invoice can be partially accepted. It can be refused for some different reason also. So we can have a very thin analyze of the status of the invoice. So that's the invoice life cycle, and it will need to be updated in a real time by the different operators in the transaction. And also, payment details will need to be reported to the tax authorities. It includes invoice number, payment date, and the amount paid per invoice. It will help, as previously said, the tax authorities to determine the correct amount of VAT due on each transaction. We included the periodicity in this section, so the e-reporting will have to be sent for the companies under the standard regime 3 times a month, the 10th, the 20th, and the last day of the month. The companies will have 4 days to submit the e-reporting. And also for other companies that are not under this standard regime, they will need to send the e-reporting only once a month, sorry, by the 7th day following the transaction operation, the months of the transaction operation. I wanted to add something, sorry. Of course, I said previously that the status of the invoice will have to be updated. This is a separate transaction. The update of the cycle life of the invoice will need to be done on a real-time basis. So we include it in the e-reporting, but this is a very specific transaction that needs to be done on a real-time basis.
And finally, the last part. So when is the reform going to be applicable? We included in that part a little timetable that will allow you to check if your concerns and on which date, because as I said in the introduction, the reform will be progressively implemented in France from 2024 to 2026. And then Pascal and I made a little research on what you need to anticipate and the actions that you might be able to take in order to prepare those obligations.
Sorry, Mathieu, I move fast.
No, there is no issue. Thank you, Pascal. So about the timetable, so the first wave of implementation of the reform will be July 2024, July 1st, 2024. So on this date and from this date, there will be an obligation to issue e-invoices and transmit additional data, the data that we mentioned and that we will see at the end of this presentation for established large companies. So the apportionment between the category of company is based on a turnover scale and an employment scale. So a number of employees and thresholds of turnover. From July 1st, 2024, there will also be the obligation for all taxable persons to accept the reception of electronic invoices. Basically, that means that even though you're not an established large company in France, you will have to be able to have the informatics system able to receive the e-invoices. Because even though you're a small company, if you're working with established large companies, so companies that enter into this category, you will have to be able to receive e-invoices from them. The second wave of implementation of the reform will be the obligation to issue electronic invoices for established mid-sized companies. So it will happen 6 months later, as it will be January 1st, 2025. And as mentioned earlier, the category of companies is established by the French government and is based on a turnover threshold or an employment threshold. And finally, the last wave of implementation will occur on January 1st, 2026, and will be focused on small and medium-sized companies, which is in France for the PME, and the very small companies, which consist in France for the micro-entreprise.
Thank you, Mathieu. So just for the record, we have put it into another scheme here. So e-invoicing, all taxable person shall be able to receive e-invoice from the 1st of July 2024. Only established companies shall issue e-invoicing following the implementation schedule. And e-reporting, all taxable person, which all companies that hold a valid French VAT number shall submit an e-reporting from the 1st of July 2024, depending on the kind of transaction that we explained previously at the beginning of this webinar. So what you need to anticipate, so maybe you can say that 2 years and a half is quite far from now, and it will be maybe interesting to deal with this issue next year and not before. And we believe it's wrong. And the number of attendees of this webinar prove that companies are very interested in this reform and need to understand what they need to do. There are different steps, things that you can do already in 2022, and then in in 2023, we will start effective process. But first, from now, you need to communicate internally with all the department, the accounting, the finance, the supply chain, all the actors of the supply chains, the legal department also. Everybody in your company should be aware of this new reform and the consequences for the company, for their work, for the everyday task. It is very important to anticipate. Change is very difficult in the companies, and it is a quite huge change that will be implemented with the upcoming reform. Identify all the stakeholder. You have to communicate with the customers, suppliers, subcontractor. Maybe identify your software editors. Maybe contact your current editors of software. What he intends to do. Is he aware of these changes? Sometimes they are not. It is quite surprising. What are their intention? Do they want to be a DO, some kind of a close partner that will help you to meet your requirements? Or maybe they want to be a PP. So do they start there to mitigate and to check all the requirements necessary to be registered to the French tax authorities and be able to communicate with the PIP and the different stakeholder and partners? What is the volume of the transaction impacted? Maybe it is not necessary to start huge informatic IT development if only few transactions are involved in the process. Maybe you'll be able to deal it manually or to identify your subcontractors that will help you to meet your requirements. And of course, check the different technical options and costs. Do you want to have your own solution in-house? Will you identify a standalone software that will help you to communicate with the PIP? This is all the subject you have to address from now to be ready at the 1st of July, because all companies are concerned from the 1st of July as the 2024, as they need to receive e-invoice from their suppliers. I assume we reached the end of this webinar. So you can see we leave the annex on the PowerPoint document, so you will be able to check it later. It was not the point of this webinar to go deeply into the techniques we told you in the introduction. So we now have to thank you. I'm sorry, but it will be very short to deal with the question. There are a lot of questions I saw in the chat, and we suggest that we will maybe check them and provide some answers that will be included in the PDF that will be available after the webinar, and we will send it to you with all the questions and the answer we will be able to provide. TEVEA International is here to help you to handle this upcoming reform. We can help you to identify your transaction. We also are impacted about this reform, so we will leave it internally, and so we will be able also to help companies who want to have some assistance to deal with these new requirements. The reform is not done yet, so there will be technical updates, maybe changes. So we keep in touch. Don't hesitate to follow up on our LinkedIn page, on our website. and you will receive relevant information on this specific subject. All right. Thank you, Mathieu, for this webinar. And we are sorry it was very technical. We hope we haven't lose our attendees. And we will be happy to meet you in another webinar in the following months. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.